Now, roundtable number 1, dedicated to the regulation and the transformation of asset management industry. Indeed, these asset managers are facing more and more regulations that are both national and European. So this is translated into costs, fees, competitiveness, and this constrains all this industry to change, to transform itself, to face the future-related challenges. So I'll welcome Laurence Caron-Habib, Head of Public Affairs, BNP Paribas Asset Management. Also, Alexandre Koch, Head of Distribution and Clients Relations Hub at IFG. Didier Deliage, Deputy Director, the AMF. Luis Rodriguez, Head of the Depository Function at CIC Market Solutions. If you will take a seat, thank you. So we're going to start with you, Didier Deliage, so we can have an overview of this the existing regulatory system. It's very heavy. EU produces a huge number of standards. The financial products are becoming more and more complex. And also with the aspect of sustainable finance that imposes constraints. So we have 4 hours to talk, don't we? More or less. So I think that this morning we're going to mention that on a regular basis. This is not a trend, indeed, that will stop. The way that the European institutions are organized are such that the orientation needs related to savings towards some of the sectors, the funding of the real assets. All this is such that the implementation of new regulations is needed, even if the new recommendation is to try and make things as simple as possible in order to make sure that the investors are protected. Because indeed, there are investors who will invest in products that are proposed to them.
So these are the last trends that we've been looking at for the past few months and years. What we see is that we speak a lot about the funding of economy. In that chapter or category, I would say, we speak about the implementation of LTE 2.0 with the peculiarity of investing in real assets, infrastructure, property that benefit from a retail passport within the European Union. Those projects are not very easy to sell. For retail customers, there is the period within which they can withdraw from a transaction. So we need to make sure that those projects correspond to investors. You have a real push for these projects in France. We already aggregated about 15 of them. There are some more coming up in the pipeline. At this point in time, I would say that it's been a success. It's been pushed forward by the Green Economy Act. And companies have the obligation of including these kinds of projects. There is a minimum share of the assets that need to be real assets. In those projects, we are going to find assets like 2.0. And what we call super evergreen, those are the ones that are open to purchasing. That's always a challenge, and one of the difficulties of these projects is to manage liquidity. Those assets are not liquid. And the first big theme is the funding of the economy that you find in these two acts that are quite recent. There are some of the dispositions that have been put in place in October of 2024, and some of them have been published in the third quarter of last year. I know that we're going to come back to this later on, but just a few words about sustainable finance. I would say that it continues to evolve, and for AMF, I would say that we decided to comply with the guidelines that define a certain minimum standards, different ESG goals, and those guidelines are have been applicable since November. We want to conserve the dispositions of those. And about the commercial documents, we want to make sure that beyond the names and the criteria of the names, there are things attributed to different sectors that make transition more straightforward, with ESG goals being the central part of their discourse. So we're going to keep those topics that can sometimes seem a little bit tricky for people working in our industry. And the last point that I wanted to talk about is the distribution. I think that you've all followed debates about it, about the improvement of protection of retail investors, of retail investors. I'm not going to give you too many details about it. It's still evolving. There are things changing. At the moment, we don't really have a fixed date for when it is going to be put in place. There is the new European Commission that is going to be set, and I would say that we have a goal that is to make sure that even if the information made available to the investors isn't perfect, we need to make sure that we do not offer them to them products that have costs that are too high. Those things get accumulated, yes, and sometimes it's not transparent also. Yes, that's right. Sometimes you can have a product with a HR2, and sometimes you would have like an equivalent product, and the manager can explain to you that some things are more competitive than others. Sometimes it's not very easy to prove it. Sometimes you don't have the incitation to propose some products more than others. I'm going to stop here, but I just wanted to mention those few topics. Some things can be a little bit tricky. Sometimes you can't compare products. It's technical products that we have in front of us, and they will pose problems during implementation. About sustainable finance products, there's a lot of regulatory pressure in this sector, especially in terms of sustainable preferences. Can you speak a little bit about this, please, Lawrence? Yes, of course, about sustainable finance, there's a lot of things to say. As you all know, there's a lot of texts that have been adopted in the past few years. As Delphine said earlier, it hasn't probably been done in the order that we would have liked to see. But the last topic to date is the name of the funds with the ESMO direction and the question of how it is applied by national regulators. So the framework is quite broad. About sustainable preferences, to speak about the topic of the distribution topic, because that is what is interesting to us, we indeed have modifications of the MIF that happened in 2022 with similar things for insurance products. So there are plans where there are a certain number of questions to be asked from a customer to enable him to invest in products that would be aligned with his goals in terms of sustainability. Well, of course, it's a good intention, but we need to remember what the initial objective of it. The initial objective is to reorient savings towards a more sustainable economy. So at the end of the chain, what we need to see is that the client is involved in all of these questions. The problem is that when you look at all of these questions that are asked to the client, is that the things the customers can be a little bit puzzled. The questions that are asked use very difficult concepts like taxonomy, sustainable investment, main negative incidents. Those are not very straightforward concepts, and I'm not sure that very many people know much about it, including among financial players. So what it leads to is that we have a situation where the framework as it has been defined today does not allow us to attain the initial objective that it is supposed to allow us to reach. So you were speaking about regulatory pressure. It's not really about regulatory inflation. It's more about the question of making sure that beyond the norm we manage to reach the objective that has been initially set. And if we don't, it's a problem. If there is no connection between different texts, if there are no links between different texts that cover different players of the chain, then it is a bit tricky. Another point about sustainable finances, well, it's not the end of the story. Many things can still happen. What we have in the pipeline for the past, for some time now, is the review of the ACDR text that define transparency obligations for the market participants, including asset managers, but not only asset managers, with a proposition that hasn't been validated yet, but the proposition would be to envisage the introduction of a new category that would replace what we have today in the text, and that is called Article 6, Article 7, Article 8, 6, 8, and 9. Sorry, 6, 8, and 9. We also have an announcement by the Commission about the omnibus initiative that would consolidate taxonomy, CSRD, many different things, and very clearly in those revision works it is essential to ask ourselves the question of what is really the objective that we want to reach, and if we introduce new categories into the CFDR, how do we use them, and to what extent it is going to facilitate this question about sustainable preferences to allow players to invest in the sustainable finance. So it's not about sustainable inflation. The main question for me is, are we managing to get the initial objective that we set ourselves? Alexander Koch, we can see that regulation isn't always adapted to the stakes of the players in the investment sector. Draghi said that we need to orient savings towards more long-term investments. and we can see that it doesn't always correspond to those objectives. What we need to do? Yes, hello. Yes, as Delphine and Didier said, there is a topic about funding of the economy. As Lawrence, I would like to say a few things about the coherence between the regulations to be put in place and the objectives that we set ourselves collectively. If we look at the European picture now, without wanting to be too pessimistic, there are questions of digital transition and economic transition. The European Commission estimated, by the way, that we need 750 billions of euro for investment in Europe for the ecological and digital transition. Also, European economy is lagging behind the American economy. The GDP used to be similar, but now we can see that differences get bigger. It is fundamental to build the union of capital market. Now it is called the Union for Savings, which would allow to orient savings of the European people towards financial market. Just to give you a few figures, at the European level, this savings is 90% of GDP, and in the United States it's 310% of GDP. That's for mid and long-term savings. And you can see these figures in various reports, Draghi reports, different reports. So European savings are not sufficiently invested in financial investments, but they are invested more and more abroad. And all of that, of course, takes away investment from the European market, and we can see that there are very obvious stakes in terms of competitiveness and sovereignty. A few propositions for different reports that we have mentioned. There's been Leta and Noyer report that proposed two interesting approaches. The first one would be to develop the retirement savings plans in Europe. The retirement savings is long-term by default, by its nature. The second initiative is the creation of a label applicable to saving projects invested mainly in Europe. We also have LARIS, as Didier was saying. We don't have a complete visibility on the final text. Yes, it is quite recent, isn't it? It is quite recent because it's an initiative by the European Commission that has been published in May 2023. There's been negotiations since. We know the position of the Parliament and of the Council, but still there are things that can happen. But what we can see now, of course, there are positive things on financial education, on value for money concepts that are quite relevant, but there are also puzzling, a bit worrying things about different topics for VFM. The risk is to have the VFM a little bit too rigid, with the risk of standardization of products. And of course, that would be prejudicial, that would be damaging to the funding of the economy. There's also the topic of accumulation of standards within the LARIS. For instance, the inducement test, the best interest test. We also spoke about VFM, also the complexification of products for ESG. For instance, Lawrence was saying those texts about ESG have not yet been validated. So all of that complexify the customer path, and it wouldn't exactly excite them to invest in the financial markets. There's more and more obligations that increase costs. It's supposed to be there for the protection of clients, but we don't really see the added value. All of those different tests and regulatory burdens, they complicate the activity of asset management funds in Europe, because we know, and it is true for most of the developed economies, that managers will invest mainly in their own region. There's been a study that's been reported, that's been published, and what you can see in that study is that in France, people invest mostly in France and Europe. So in Europe, we can see that the part of portfolios invested in Europe has significantly decreased for the past 10 or 15 years, and the share that has been invested in the US has increased because competitiveness in Europe has decreased, so funds have gone progressively more and more abroad. So that is about the competitiveness of the European economy. Luis Rodriguez, for you, what is important is the protection of the investor by managing to reconcile two different objectives. Yes, our way of looking at regulations is a little bit different. As CIC Market Solutions, we support our clients, we work in the distribution. We have a primary solution, the secondary solutions, and the structured products.
Overall research and last solution, which is the depository solution. We have two scopes that are the depository function, amongst other things. So I'm in charge of the depository function and the regulation, well, how we see things. We are focused on the protection of the investors. There are different systems to do so. First, the control of management constraints, whether it is statutory, regulatory. We're going to also focus on the drafting of the documents that aim at providing a relevant vision to the investors with regards to his or her expectations. And also we're going to implement supervisions, controls at the management level in order to make sure that things are properly coordinated. So what we also say is that surely these regulations is applied on the management companies, on the managers, but also the asset managers, but also there will be fees, costs, expenses related to the tools, but also other expenses. So indeed, this is an issue, but seen from a depository, someone in the depository functions, it's something which is necessary. So this roundtable is actually about transformation, distribution and transformation of asset management. So actually there are phenomena related to the arbitration of markets, OVCM, structured products. So things are less protected for the structured products rather than the OVCM. But sometimes they're forbidden in some of the countries. So are they interesting, or should we be cautious with this product? What do you think? Excellent question. I think that indeed we should be it's about being cautious because although they're authorized in France, some other countries have decided to ban them. For instance, in Belgium, there's a charter, a specific charter with specificities, with constraints, with requirements. We also have there are also products that are under the aegis of the prospectus directive. They don't have the same level of protection for the investors as for products that are under the form of a collective or flow products. For instance, the eligibility rules are not the same, so things are more contract-based, so they're going to be less protective for the investors. And when it comes to the risk management, the investor may not understand. For instance, when there's a structured product which is released by SPV with a potential risk beyond the formula, what is promised, the level of protection is not the same as the OPVCM, with different options related to the derivated product and so on and so forth. So you see, things are not always well understood by the investors or properly explained or clearly explained when the contracts are signed. This being said, there are a number of safeguards because we've made sure that the products are not complex to the point where the investors don't understand them, and this is based on Article 2010/05. So if there's a presumption of improper trading or commercial marketing of the product with different level of complexities, we can consider that sometimes the investors may not understand fully what these products are about. So it's also about products that mainly come from Switzerland and Germany, the AMCs. These are also structured products, but they have specificity. They're based on a pre-established formula, and it's based on a portfolio which is managed actively as an OPC. So these products are products that I don't really like because there's an issue related to the playing field with the collective or flow management. There's a regulatory framework without any depository, no management company, or so on and so forth. So this year we've released recommendation 2024-06 to frame the way that these products are structured. So again, it's not prohibition, it's just about framing these products. Once again, these products, we are very cautious when it comes to these products. There are several consultative commissions from the IMF working on a better definition of the good practices as for these structured products. So this is work which is taking place at the moment. It's in progress. Luis Rodriguez, we'd like to have your opinion, your view on these products. When there's private equity, it can be sold, of course, with a performance over a longer period of time, so it may be easier. So what do you think when it comes to the flow related to the conventional funds? Maybe it's trickier, maybe it's more challenging. So my colleagues from the structured programs will agree with me. It's exponential, that's clear. There's a market-related context. Didier said very well on the fact that we need to understand that we don't have a depository function on these projects as such. So depending on the context, things won't be deployed in the same way. So there's a ratio to establish between the different products, in taking into account the risks that are guaranteed products or the products that are not guaranteed. What I can say is that clearly the releaser of the product, the quality of the releaser will be a key factor when it comes to risks. Now, if I'm focusing on the private equity part, Indeed, the investments are cover a longer period of time with liquidity values that are further away compared to conventional management. Liquidity management are different. Evergreen is maybe a specific case when it comes to this topic, but this strategy is indeed over a longer period of time. In the longer term, that's a way for us to coordinate the performance with in mind the liquidity, because private equity is a long-term investment, as I said earlier. When it comes to conventional management, as such, I can say that liquidity management is faster. So the risks are not going to be based on the same elements. Now, when it comes to distribution, I'm going to focus on conventional management, and we can see that there's an acceleration of the distribution through blockchain, for instance. So this is also due to the existing context vis-à-vis the distribution that we can see on the market. Laurence Habib, indeed, when it comes to the transformation, especially with regards to the new products, ETFs, and so on, in Paris, and the biggest marketplace in Europe, in continental Europe, we can see that the margin for maneuver of the management companies is shrinking. So what can we do? Several things I'd like to say. Maybe I'll first refer to the actively managed accounts, these structured products, because indeed this echoes what we said earlier. There are different layers related to regulations over players that are already regulated. For instance, the alternative fund with different directives. So we are adding layers on entities who are already very framed, regulated, with a strong protection of the investors. Indeed, this is a key topic. But also what's taking place is the following. The market is going to adapt itself. It will adapt spontaneously, so to speak. So this is what we tend to forget when defining some of the rules. We would look into the subject in an isolated manner, so to speak, but not taking into account the results, the consequences. And here, this is what we are talking about is the illustration of what we are saying, namely of this phenomenon. One of the consequences of the ARIS is potentially a phenomenon related to an arbitrary element. So the market players will have to find solutions not only not to bypass, but rather to avoid rules that are such that the situation will be impossible. So in addition to the structured products, it's also about the market context, the rates and so on and so forth. We need to take that into account because the structured products are very much related to the market's condition. OETF, indeed, just look at the figures, the flows related to the OETF, where there are figures that have came up recently, the first flows in 2025. So this is factual. So there are active OETFs. This is a new trend. Typically, we were amongst the first ones at BNP Paribas Asset Management to offer this kind of product, and very probably we will keep doing so. We also have a very strong focus on the sustainable OETF. So our whole range of OETF is sustainable. So we can see developments there. We can see changes there. Another thing about the ETF. That echoes what was said on the ARIS. So often we would hear that we need to offer to the clients products that are cheap and also simple products, readable products indeed. And I think that Alexandre will develop this idea later. Some consider that cheap and simple equals ETF. And in the discussion about ARIS, there's a subject that was qualified as being the ETF clause, according to which everything's done for the client goes and invests into ETFs. So I have nothing against ETFs, indeed, but if we have investments, massive investments, and an increase of the ETFs, then maybe we should ask ourselves questions with regards to the diversification of the offer to the investors, but also the financial investment, because it's not the subject for this morning, but indeed the main subject for this morning, but it is anyway a key topic, a key issue. So indeed the ETFs are part of the transformation phenomenon, but once again here we should look into things globally, overall, and ask ourselves the right questions. Indeed. What do you think? What is your, Didier Deliage, what is your opinion as someone from the IMF? I'd like to come back to this matter related to the regulations. Indeed, from the time when you have regulations on the scope where there's something missing, we can see that the players would go in this direction to offer products that were not supposed to be the one initially. So when it comes to these structured products, there are other FIA, real estate AFAs, with products that were aimed at investment in real estate, with systems such as the CPI and also the OPCIs as well, more recently with liquidities, cash flows, systems enabling cash flows for investors. But this is not applied to the funds that are not very regulated, with those risks, with cash flow, liquidities, systems. With some other players consider that the denatured OPCIs are not that good, and then they went for another option in order to offer pure products, so to speak, without any safeguards. And in the real estate crisis that we've been experiencing for the last 18 months, we can say that the products are those that are the first impacted, mainly impacted, and other products have been able to go through this period of time, this crisis, with fewer impacts. With the FIAs that experienced difficulties, and not really other products. So new regulation is about making sure that when there's a new regulation or an amendment in the regulations, that would enable us to create products or having behaviors that are not aligned at all with the initial intention. But anyway, they will develop because we have to make do with the regulation before looking into the less regulated options. AMF-wise, we are quite agnostic when it comes to active or passive management. We have no preference. We've amended the French regulation last year in 2024 to enable the domiciliation in France of active management. However, we're not really in favor for a preference to be mentioned in the EU regulation for the ETF, in such a way that the other objectives set at the European level are not impacted. Because indeed, there are ETFs that will be invested in big entities that are not always Europeans. There are many Anglo-Saxon, Anglo-American players. For instance, also the Archcap that are managed by Anglo-American entities. And we don't really wish this to be done. So there's a debate about this simple product. We know where it comes from. And in order to simplify the contracts, especially when it comes to products that are linear, that are not very complex. So we would like to say that it would be good to introduce in the EU regulation a chapter about European economy fundings, rather than to have a preference for these ETFs.
We should probably speak about the ESMA proposition about the creation of basic products. Probably that's important. Yes, I would just like to speak a little bit about ARIS. In my previous intervention, I spoke about the complexity and then the need to simplify things. In this ARIS project, there is a strong focus on costs with different propositions and helping to orient retail investors towards more simple products, which is quite understandable. In the same perspective, there's a proposition that was presented in 2024 that has been diffused in quite a lot since, about basic and simple projects towards retail investors. And among the criteria in order to be eligible to the label is the low complexity, but also the cost efficiency, which is a concept that we find already in Laris, which basically means the cheapest product. We could also speak here about a subcategory of UCIT ESMA, really to put a focus on this product, offered to add a simplified path for this project. So the idea would be to put focus on this aspect. There's also been a surprising debate about associating fiscal advantages to the subscription of these projects, which is a little bit counterintuitive because normally the investment in these projects means the will to take some risks. So fiscal advantages for the subscription of a basic and cheap product, we can't quite see the interest of doing it. Beyond what I've just said, it also posed several problems, among which was the fact that these products could constitute a category of project like UCITS. So creating a subcategory of these UCITS would be damaging for the visibility and of this label, so that would be dangerous, and we think that it needs to be avoided. Another thing is the definition of what is a simple project. There are already relative criteria about complexity in the IMF, so beware of not adding new definitions of what complexity is. So a simple project needs to be comprehensible, understood by customers, and also easy to manage. So it needs to be easy to understand and easy to manage. Also, just to make a link with what I was saying earlier, I wanted to speak about the funding of economy. Simple and comprehensible projects is good. Cheap projects, it's good. But speaking about the interest of the investor, we need to have diversification, not only passive management, but also active management, small cap, large cap. There's a lot of topics of discussion of this. The funding of the economy we already spoke about it a lot. If we only choose the cheapest and the most simple products, it's not very good for the financement of the European economy. I'm not against the idea of putting forward simple products, but and I'm making a link with the propositions of different reports that I mentioned earlier. We would we would prefer to have a European label. Would think that we could have like a European product. We saw it with PEP, for instance. We consider that a label would be more adapted than a product. So a European label that certifies the investment towards the European economy, a long-term investment with the possibility of withdrawal during the course of life for different events, prudent and dynamic product. This is quite clear, declarative information given to customers rather than inundating the customer with lots and lots of information. Probably also label for long-term savings, and with that type of criteria, we think that this label will be relevant, and in that case, fiscal incentives would be interesting to have from the European bodies. We are approaching the end of this round table. Maybe Lawrence Gabi, maybe you can say a few words about this movement towards consolidation. There is a non-negligible percentage of management companies that will need to adapt the economic model under this regulatory pressure. Yes, before I answer your question, I would just like to say that I totally agree with what Alexander has just said. And let's not forget our objective. There is the urgent objective of financing the economy. This is what we need to put forward. So these basic and simple products, this idea is a little bit surprising, because what is important today is to define how we get where we want to get and how we protect people who have these savings. So we capitalize on what we've done and underline the importance of the objectives that we set ourselves. About the consolidation, the word speaks for itself, I would say. Yeah, we can see it happening every day. Yes, indeed, we can see it happening every day. It is very clear. And it is the result of the whole of the transformation processes that we spoke about today. Several times we said already today that the digital economy is taking more and more place. The role of the data is crucial. And it's not something that you can do overnight. So in order to evolve in this direction, you need to make investments. Massive investments are necessary in going towards using cloud, for instance, artificial intelligence. Today there are investments and massive needs in terms of investment, and in order to do that, you need to be sufficiently professional in order to do that. Have the fact that we have more and more checks and regulations that also explains partly this phenomenon. The phenomenon of consolidation is also provoked by the need to build some kind of an expertise on a certain type of assets. We spoke about private asset capital risks, etc. Being a performant player in this sector, in order to be performant, you need to have experts. So there is a need to go and search for talents in order to answer that need. And indeed, consolidation is also an element that is necessary in order to be a global player. If we look today at the panorama of asset managers, the top 10 asset managers are Anglo-Saxon. So consolidation is unavoidable in order to continue to survive in this new context. Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you, and let's give our speakers a round of applause.
Welcome to Paris. Our global fund registration team acts as a one-stop shop, providing comprehensive support to meet all regulatory requirements for the distribution of foreign investment schemes in Switzerland. With our broad range of services, we help our clients navigate the complexities of fund registration and ensure seamless market access. With us, you can also expand your knowledge about the Financial Services Act. Our online courses are now available 24/7. With GFR at 1741 Group, we prioritise your needs, act independently in your interest, offer attractive representation fees, cover FINMA fees for agent changes, and provide expert support to ensure your distribution team is FINSA compliant. You can contact our team for dedicated support and expert guidance.